welcome back to our weekly Bible study. This month we'll be looking at some passages from the Gospel of Matthew, beginning today with chapter 9, verse 18, and we're going to be looking at some very specific ideas related to things that Jesus said and did, and how those ideas can inform and enrich our lives as followers of Jesus. Today our theme is compassion. Looking online, I found several definitions for this word compassion. First, from the Merriam-Webster.com site, we have sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. I also looked at dictionary.com, and here's what it had to say. A feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. You know, the thing I noticed in both of those definitions is there's not only this emotional sense, but there's also the actual response. There's an action that backs the feeling. And I think that's very important. I also looked up synonyms for the word compassion. Here's a few that I found. Kindness, mercy, grace, charity, sympathy, tenderheartedness. I looked at some antonyms and found mercilessness and indifference. So what are the triggers for compassion? When we look at our verses today, beginning with verse 18, we see that there are two stories of healing that both start with Jesus' compassion. Taking a look at verse 18, we have, while he was saying these things to them, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in and knelt before him, saying, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live." So what triggered compassion in this first story? Well, we can imagine as parents, those of us who are parents, what it would be like to lose a child. And so we have a very distraught parent who has just lost a child. Jesus sensed and he had sympathy for this parent. Now in the second story, beginning with verse 20, we have, then suddenly a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his cloak. For she said to herself, "If I only touch his cloak, I will be made well." Jesus had compassion for this woman because he knew what her life experience had been over the past 12 years in a society that would look down on unclean people. She was unable to socialize, to have friends. She lived a very isolated existence, not to mention the physical effects of her disease. So one of the questions I think that we're to ask today is, what triggers compassion for us? I think we also need to take a look as we read the story and see that in both cases, Jesus fulfilled the second idea of compassion, which is he responded to alleviate the pain. A second idea I think we need to look at here is the unconditional love, the unconditional compassion that Jesus shows. And as we look at the first example, the synagogue leader, he came to Jesus as a last-ditch effort. He didn't come to Jesus with a full faith, and yet Jesus still helped him. Neither did the woman with the 12 years of hemorrhages. She really believed in the magic of Jesus, knew that if she could just touch his garment, she would be able to receive the power. She wasn't really looking to become a follower of Jesus. She was looking simply for healing, and Jesus responded with compassion. You know, the message for you and I are that there are certain things that trigger our compassion, and there are other things that leave us indifferent, mercilessness, so to speak. And so we're really to take a look at having compassion for all people, realizing that all people are children of God, and as such, they're people we should have compassion for. Now, the third idea I saw in today's lesson is the enemies of compassion. It's interesting, in verse 18, it says, while he was saying these things, suddenly a leader of the synagogue came in. Jesus was teaching a group of followers of John the Baptist, and they were having a Sunday school class, and Jesus was teaching the lesson, and in burst the synagogue leader with this great need that he had. And we see Jesus' response, and Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. So we see that Jesus was busy, but he was willing to be interrupted. And then on the way to taking care of this interruption, yet another interruption comes. He realizes that someone has come up in the crowd and tried to secretly touch his garment. Once again, he stops, he faces this woman with the 12 years of hemorrhages, and he encourages her and he says, hey, your faith has made you well. So Jesus did not let busyness become the enemy of his compassion. Think about, for you and I, some of the things that keep us from being compassionate, the enemies of compassion. Certainly busyness, self-centeredness. Sometimes it's just that conditional compassion where we don't necessarily feel someone deserves our compassion. We need to be very much aware in our lives of the type of compassion Jesus had, which is a compassion for all people at all times. I follow the Smith and Helway's formation series for these lessons, and at the end of each one of our lessons, there's a section called What About Me, where the writer gives us some questions related to the study for the day. These were really good questions this week, and I thought I would just, or points, and I thought I would just talk about those. We all find ourselves in need of some kind of healing. You know, one of the things about being compassionate to others is also an awareness that sometimes we also need to have others be compassionate to us. And it's often for us easier to show compassion to others than to ask for compassion for ourselves or to receive compassion. It's okay. We all at some point in time need healing. We're truly all broken people, just some more obvious than others. The second idea is that Jesus is available and he's sensitive to our needs, but as we saw in today's lessons, we do still need to approach him first. The synagogue leader approached Jesus, interrupted him in his Sunday school class, and asked for his help. It was a last-ditch effort, but nevertheless, he approached Jesus. We also see the woman with the 12 years of hemorrhages. She too approaches Jesus. So it's a reminder to us that we need healing in our lives, but we need to also understand that Jesus wants us to approach him. He's available. He's sensitive to our needs. He's non-conditional in his love for us. And so it's just a reminder that that needs to be part of our prayer life, is asking Jesus to help heal us in particular areas of our life. One of the things I also like to mention about that point is, often we can be frustrated reading about the healing ministry of Jesus because we wonder why so many people were healed in the Bible, and yet today so many prayers of healing seem to go unanswered. I think we need to understand that the healing that the people in the Bible all received, while it was a response to their request for some type of physical healing, Jesus was more interested in healing them spiritually. And that is really the greater good, or the bigger picture. And so we're to be reminded that our healing often it's most important for our healing to be spiritual. So something for us to consider. And then finally, the last point is to be a disciple of Jesus is to be compassionate, just as Jesus was compassionate. We're challenged with today's scripture text to think about that unconditional compassion, to not think about who deserves our compassion, but to think about the world of human need and to be able to join Jesus in that. I like the way this passage closed with verses 37 and 38. Jesus said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." It's a good reminder to us that the world of human need is endless, and we are called to be agents of healing in that world as followers of Jesus. Well, I hope today's lesson has challenged you to think about the idea of compassion and about the ministry of healing, about what that means for you as one who needs to be healed, as well as what that means for you as a disciple of Christ. I hope you'll join us again next week when we have another topic. Till then, I hope you have a great week. God bless you, and we'll see you again next time.